The Earth hung in the vastness of space, a fragile sphere of blue and green encased in the thin, shimmering veil of its atmosphere. From the perspective of the Zenith Dominion, it was a mere gem among countless others scattered across the cosmos. Yet for humanity, it was everything. The cradle of their existence, the repository of their history, and the only home they had ever known. The invasion began without fanfare. It was not the dramatic arrival of towering motherships or devastating beams of light raining destruction. Instead, it was a silent assault, one that crept upon the Earth like an unrelenting shadow. It began with disruptions to global satellite networks, strange, inexplicable signals overriding communications, and then, without warning, the arrival of the first Zenith harvesters. These machines, alien in both form and function, descended into Earth's most vital ecosystems: the lush, life-giving Amazon rainforest, the vast Siberian tundra, and the deep, mysterious expanse of the Pacific Ocean. Wherever they landed, they drilled deep into the Earth's crust, extracting rare isotopes and minerals in quantities humanity could scarcely comprehend. At first, the world's governments scrambled to respond. Fighter jets were scrambled, missiles launched, and even nuclear weapons detonated in desperate attempts to repel the invaders. But the Zenith technology was far beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. Their ships were protected by shimmering energy shields that absorbed even the most powerful attacks with indifference. Their retaliatory strikes were precise, devastating, and always delivered with an eerie efficiency that left no room for retaliation. Cities that resisted too fiercely were reduced to smoldering ruins, their populations either annihilated or left to flee amidst the chaos. Within weeks, humanity was brought to its knees. The realization struck hard: Earth was not dealing with an enemy that could be fought through conventional means. The Zenith Dominion did not negotiate. To them, Earth was a resource, not a sovereign planet, and its inhabitants were little more than obstacles to be swept aside. In the shadow of this overwhelming force, the nations of the world did something unprecedented. They united. The newly formed United Earth Council convened for the first time in the ruins of Geneva, where the glassy remains of the UN headquarters reflected the fires still burning in the distance. Delegates from every surviving nation gathered in a hastily constructed underground chamber, their faces pale and haggard, their voices hoarse from hours of argument and debate. At the center of it all stood President Lila Andrade. A former diplomat turned wartime leader, Andrade had risen to prominence in the chaos, her calm, determined demeanor a beacon of hope for a shattered world. Now, as the de facto leader of the United Earth Council, she bore the weight of humanity's survival on her shoulders. "They won't stop until there's nothing left of our planet," Andrade said, her voice cutting through the tense murmur of the room. "We've seen what they're capable of. Negotiation isn't an option. If we don't act now, Earth will be stripped bare and will be extinct." Her words were met with grim nods and murmurs of agreement. The room was filled with people who had seen the devastation firsthand: generals who had lost entire armies, scientists who had watched their life's work destroyed, and leaders who had witnessed their nations fall. There was no room for doubt. The time for desperate measures had come. It was Dr. Malik Voss who proposed the plan. A physicist and engineer with a reputation for brilliance that bordered on madness, Voss had been working on Project Aurora even before the invasion began. Originally intended as a means of harnessing quantum energy for peaceful purposes, the project had been rapidly repurposed into a weapon of unprecedented potential: the Gaia Pulse. "The Gaia Pulse isn't just a weapon," Voss explained, his voice steady despite the weight of his words. "It's a signal, a warning. If we activate it, the energy release will be detectable across the galaxy. It will send a message to the Zenith Dominion that we are not helpless, that we have the means to strike back." Because exercise was drawing near its end, Gaia represented a transition in public opinion. The Zenith people had been saying the same thing. And if they ignore the warning, someone asked, their voice heavy with skepticism. Voss hesitated, then met Andrade's gaze. If they ignore it, we demonstrate its power. We've already run the simulations. A controlled activation in the asteroid belt would be enough to show them what the pulse can do. The room fell silent. The implications were clear. The Gaia pulse was not just a warning. It was humanity's last, desperate gamble. If it worked, the Zenith Dominion might retreat, recognizing that the cost of continuing their conquest outweighed the benefits. But if it failed, Earth would become a battleground, its already fragile ecosystems pushed to the brink of collapse. I don't like it, General Kyung said, his voice low and gruff. But I don't see another choice. If this is what it takes to make them listen, so be it. And so the decision was made. Work on the Gaia Pulse was accelerated, with the world's remaining resources funneled into its completion. Meanwhile, humanity braced itself for the inevitable retaliation. Cities were evacuated, underground bunkers fortified, and resistance movements mobilized to strike at Zenith forces wherever possible. For the first time in decades, humanity stood united, not as fragmented nations, but as one species fighting for its survival. Across the stars, the Zenith Dominion received Earth's warning. The quantum-entangled message, broadcast in every known frequency and language, was impossible to ignore. It was a simple message, delivered with the clarity of desperation. Withdraw immediately. Any further incursions will be met with force. Within the Dominion's crystal-lit war chambers, the response was immediate and dismissive. Lord Carrix, the Warden of Expansion, reviewed the transmission with a sneer. To him, Earth was a backwater planet, its inhabitants barely more advanced than the beasts that roamed its surface. That they dared to threaten the Zenith Dominion was an affront to his authority. "This is an insult," Carrix hissed, his translucent scales rippling with irritation. "A primitive species, barely capable of reaching their own moon, dares to challenge us?" "Primitive, perhaps," said Commander Tyrex, folding his leathery wings, "but their weapon is not. The Gaia Pulse could pose a threat to our operations. If they were to target one of our core systems—" "Enough," Carrix snapped. "We will crush them before they have the chance. Send the fleet, leave no trace of their defiance." But before Carrix could issue the order, another voice rang out, low and commanding. "No!" The chamber fell silent as Empress Zahoran's holographic form materialized before them. Clad in a gown of shimmering light, her presence was both ethereal and imposing. Her gaze swept over the assembled council, her expression unreadable. "Your Majesty," Carrix began, bowing low, "these creatures—" "Have achieved something even we could not," Zaharan interrupted. "A weapon capable of destabilizing solar systems. Primitive or not, they have earned our attention." Carrix bristled but said nothing. Zaharan's word was law, and even he dared not defy her. "We will not destroy Earth," Zaharan continued. "Not yet. Their defiance is a symptom of desperation, and desperation is a dangerous force. We must tread carefully." "And if they activate the pulse?" Tyrex asked. Zaharian's eyes glimmered with cold determination. "Then we will show them the cost of rebellion. But until then, we observe." Back on Earth, the tension was palpable. The Gaia Pulse was primed, its activation sequence ready at a moment's notice. In the Aurora Command Center beneath the Andes Mountains, President Andrade and Dr. Voss watched as the Zenith fleets began to reposition themselves, their ships forming an ominous ring around the planet. "They're waiting," Andrade said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're calculating," Voss replied. "The question is, are we prepared for their answer?" Zenith Dominion's ships hung in orbit like silent predators, their sleek, dark forms blotting out stars and casting long, ominous shadows over the Earth's surface. From the ground they looked almost beautiful in their stillness, like monuments to the unknown. But those who had witnessed their power firsthand knew the truth. They were not monuments. They were weapons, and their silence was merely the calm before the storm. Inside the Aurora Command Center, tension was a tangible thing. The room buzzed with the quiet hum of machinery, punctuated by the occasional burst of static from a communications console or the sharp tone of an alert. The air smelled faintly of ozone and metal, a reminder of the cutting-edge technology that surrounded them. But for all the technology at their disposal, humanity's leaders felt the weight of their vulnerability. Every screen displayed Zenith ships or live feeds from the planet's surface, where harvesters continued their unrelenting work. Direction and ballistic viewport of the Gaia Pulse's final calibration. Around him, his team worked in silence, their bloodshot from lack of sleep, and his usually sharp eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep, and his normally tidy appearance was disheveled. He hadn't left the command center in days, too consumed by the monumental task of completing the Gaia Pulse's final calibration. Around him, his team worked in silence, their movements precise and mechanical. The weight of their task left no room for conversation. President Leela Andrade entered the room, her heels clicking softly against the floor. She carried herself with a calm authority, but even she couldn't hide the tension in her expression. Her dark eyes swept over the room, taking in the weary faces of the scientists and technicians. "Much longer?" she asked, her voice low but firm. Voss turned to face her, his features hard. "We're close. The Gaia Pulse is nearly at full capacity, but we still need to fine-tune the targeting systems. If we misfire, even by a fraction of a degree, the entire system could destabilize. And if we wait too long, it won't matter," Andrea said, folding her arms. "The Zenith Dominion isn't known for its patience." "They're not known for their mercy, either," Voss replied. "If we rush this and it fails, we'll hand them the advantage. They'll see our desperation." Dantrid sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "We don't have the luxury of time. The longer we wait, the more they take from us. The Pacific Rim is already collapsing. Entire ecosystems are dying. If we lose control of the oceans, it's over." Voss nodded, his jaw tightening. He knew she was right. Every second they delayed gave the Zenith Dominion more time to strip the Earth of its resources, to bleed it dry, and yet he couldn't shake the fear that they were playing with forces they barely understood. Before Andrade could say more, an alert blared through the room, the sound sharp and jarring. A technician at one of the consoles called out, "Incoming transmission from Zenith Command." The console went dark. Displays of red and green lights illuminated the faces of the travelers. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to the central screen as the Zenith Dominion's emblem, a stylized, crystalline star, appeared. A moment later, the image shifted, revealing the face of Lord Carix. His expression was one of cold disdain, his translucent, scaled visage glinting under the light of the Dominion's war chamber. "Then, humans," Carix began, his voice resonating with an unnatural timbre. "You are a curious species, clinging to defiance despite the inevitability of your extinction. Your warning has been received, and it has been deemed inconsequential." A ripple of unease passed through the room. Andrade stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the screen. "Lord Carix," she said, her tone steady despite the pounding of her heart, "we will not surrender our planet. If you continue your assault, we will use the Gaia Pulse. You've seen what it can do." Carix's lips curled into something resembling a smile, though it held no warmth. "We have seen your weapon, President Andrade. A fascinating creation for such a primitive species. But do you truly believe it will save you? Do you think we would leave ourselves vulnerable to such unpredictability?" Andrade refused to waver. "The Gaia Pulse is not a threat. It's a promise. If you do not leave our planet, we will not hesitate to use it." Eric's eyes narrowed, his gaze boring into hers. For a moment the room was silent, the tension thick enough to cut. Then he spoke, his voice low and venomous. "You mistake desperation for strength. Very well, President Andrade. If it is annihilation you seek, we shall oblige. Prepare your species for extinction." The screen went dark, leaving the command center in an uneasy silence. Andrade stood motionless, her fists clenched at her sides. She felt the weight of every life on Earth pressing down on her, the crushing responsibility of her position. Voss broke the silence. "He's bluffing. They wouldn't risk destroying the planet outright. It's too valuable." "Do you really believe that?" Andrade asked, turning to face him. "They've already destroyed cities. What's stopping them from taking it a step further?" Voss hesitated. He didn't have an answer. Hours passed, each one dragging slower than the last. In that time, the Zenith ships began to reposition, their movements deliberate and calculated. Surveillance drones captured images of harvesters accelerating their extraction processes, stripping the land with an urgency that suggested the Dominion was preparing for something monumental. Andrade and her team watched the screens, their anxiety mounting. Every new image was a reminder of what was at stake. Entire forests reduced to barren wastelands, oceans drained of their vitality, their once vibrant ecosystems reduced to lifeless voids. And above it all, the Zenith ships, their presence an oppressive weight on the planet. In the midst of the chaos, a new signal appeared on the monitors, an anomaly detected near the moon's surface. Voss leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he studied the data. "That's not one of ours," he muttered. "What is it?" Andrea asked, stepping closer. "A Zenith's vessel, but it's different, smaller, and its trajectory suggests it's not part of the main fleet." "Could it be a scout?" someone suggested. "Possibly," Voss said, "but it's emitting a signal, a low-frequency transmission, unlike anything we've seen from the Zenith before." "Don't." Andrade's brow furrowed. "Can we intercept it?" Voss nodded. Already working on it." Within minutes, the transmission was decoded and played over the command center's speakers. The voice that emerged was distorted, alien, but unmistakably urgent. "This is Tyrex, commander of the Zenith Vanguard. I speak in defiance of the High Command. Humanity, you must listen. Your weapon, the Gaia Pulse, is your only chance. The Empress, she sees the danger, but she is constrained. Kyrex will not stop. He will destroy you, and in doing so he will doom us all. You must act, or we are all lost." The message ended abruptly, leaving the room in stunned silence. For a moment, no one spoke, the weight of the transmission settling over them like a shroud. "Do you believe him?" Andrea asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Voss hesitated, then nodded. "If he's telling the truth, it changes everything. If even a fraction of the Zenith Dominion fears the Gaia Pulse, it means we have leverage." "But it also means we're out of time," Andrade said. "If Kyrix is determined to destroy us, we have no choice. We activate the pulse." Voss's expression hardened. "Then, we'd better hope it works." The room erupted into a flurry of activity as the final preparations for the Gaia Pulse began. Every second felt like an eternity, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone in the room. Outside, the Zenith ships loomed closer, their intent clear. The countdown had begun, and Earth's fate hung by a thread. The tension within the command center had reached a fever pitch. Every second seemed to drag on forever, and every moment felt more weighted than the last. Outside, the Zenith Dominion's ships hovered like silent looming giants in orbit, their presence casting long shadows over the planet. Earth had never been more vulnerable, its ecosystems ravaged, its military exhausted, and its leaders burdened with the enormous responsibility of deciding the fate of humanity. The presence experience had rapidly proven that the Earth had never been more vulnerable, its ecosystems ravaged, its military exhausted, and its leaders burdened with the enormous responsibility of deciding the fate of humanity. At the heart of the underground facility beneath the Andes Mountains, President Leela Andrade and Dr. Malik Voss stood before the holographic displays, their eyes fixed on the myriad of data streams. The air in the room was thick with anticipation, the soft hum of advanced technology the only sound that punctuated the silence. Every console around them showed evidence of Earth's final attempt to hold on to its future. The Gaia Pulse, a weapon of imaginable power, was ready. But there was no celebrating the completion of the device. There was only dread. They were about to launch the final, desperate act in a war they had already lost in every meaningful sense. Even if the Gaia Pulse worked, even if it struck fear into the Zenith Dominion's heart, there was no guarantee it would be enough to stop the Empire's advance. Earth was a single, fragile planet, and they were about to challenge an interstellar civilization with resources and technology far beyond anything humanity could muster. "How long do we have?" Andrade's voice cut through the silence, her words sharp as she turned to face Voss. Voss's fingers danced across the console in front of him, his brow furrowing as he read the incoming data. His eyes flicked to the clock in the corner of the room, the seconds ticking away like a countdown to extinction. "We're within the window now," he said, his voice tight. "The Zenith ships are already within range. If we don't act soon, they'll make their move." "And if we do act?" Andrade asked, her gaze unwavering, though a flicker of fear lurked beneath her determined exterior. "If the police do arrest us all once we're guilty of witchcraft," she said. "If it works, we'll send a message," Voss said grimly. "But the pulse is powerful, unstable. It might be enough to disrupt their systems, force them to retreat, or it could destroy everything." Andrade's mind raced, her thoughts a whirlwind of possibilities and consequences. The truth was, they had no idea what would happen once the pulse was activated. They had only studied its theoretical effects in simulations, and the actual mechanics of it were still shrouded in uncertainty. There was no way to test it against an enemy of the Zenith Dominion's magnitude. What they did know was that this was their final, irreversible choice. If they failed, Earth would be left at the mercy of the Empire and the planet would become a mere footnote in the Dominion's unrelenting expansion. "I'm not ready to give up on Earth yet," she muttered under her breath. Voss gave her a hard look, but there was something almost sympathetic in his eyes. He knew the weight of the decision she was about to make. He had been living with it for days. But as the seconds ticked by, the stakes only seemed to grow higher, the burden heavier. "We don't have a choice," Voss said, his voice firm. "Not anymore." Andrade nodded. She had known that this moment was coming, even if she'd hoped it never would. The Dominion had pushed them to the edge, leaving them with nothing but a weapon that could either save their world or destroy it, and now they were about to use it. She straightened, her back stiff with resolve. "Initiate the sequence." The command echoed through the room, and almost immediately the command center sprang into a flurry of activity. Technicians and engineers scrambled to their stations, coordinating the final steps of the activation process. The massive quantum reactor that powered the Gaia Pulse hummed to life, its intricate network of energy conduits whirring in synchronized harmony. The weapon was a complex creation, its power derived from the very essence of the planet itself, its magnetic field, its tectonic plates, its oceans, all converging to produce an energy wave that could destabilize entire solar systems. On the screens around them, the Zenith ships began to move, their sleek, dark forms shifting in the vastness of space as they made their way toward Earth. They had undoubtedly detected the increased energy signature emanating from the command center, and now there was no turning back. The time for diplomacy had passed, the time for resistance had passed. Now, Earth was going to make its final stand. Andrade's hand hovered over the large activation button, her fingers trembling slightly. She looked at Voss one last time, seeking any hint of reassurance, but his face was set, his expression unreadable. She nodded at him, signaling that the time had come. The sound of her finger pressing the button reverberated through the room like a gunshot, sharp and final. The pulse was unleashed. The room plunged into a tense silence. As the pulse fired into the atmosphere, the shock wave of its energy rippling outward. The ground beneath their feet shuddered as the first signs of the weapon's power became apparent. Outside, in the atmosphere above the planet, the Gaia pulse began to take shape, a brilliant, blinding flare of light that radiated out from Earth's surface, cutting through the dark void of space. It was an explosion of energy, beautiful in its scale, terrifying in its potential. For a moment, everything seemed to pause. The Dominion ships faltered in their course, as if unsure of what to do. Then, without warning, the shock wave hit. The Gaia pulse struck like a cosmic hammer, sending a wave of disruption cascading across the Zenith fleet. Their ships trembled under the sudden force, energy shields flickering in response to the overwhelming surge of power. The room erupted in chaos, alarms blared, and the screens flickered as feedback surged through the communication systems. Voss and Andrade stood frozen, eyes wide as they watched the immediate aftermath unfold. The Gaia pulse had done its job. The Zenith fleet was disrupted, its ships now struggling to regain their bearings, scrambling to recover from the sudden attack. Klein was trying to recover from the sudden attack. "Is it working?" Andrade asked, her voice taut with anticipation. Voss's hands flew over the console as he analyzed the data, his brow furrowing. "It's working, but they're adapting faster than we thought. Their shields are recalibrating." Andrade's stomach churned. It wasn't enough. The pulse had barely disrupted them. If the Dominion recovered too quickly, they would unleash everything they had on Earth. "Do we have another shot?" she asked, trying to maintain her composure. Voss didn't answer immediately. Instead, he watched the screens in silence, fingers trembling as he input commands, desperately trying to identify any weakness, any edge they could exploit. Then the room went dark. A deep, shuddering tremor rocked the entire facility, and the hum of the energy reactor fell silent. The command center was plunged into complete darkness. The lights flickered, then died entirely, leaving them in a stifling void of uncertainty. Then the emergency lighting kicked in, casting everything in a harsh, dim glow. "What's happening?" Andrade demanded, her voice frantic. Voss's eyes widened as he scanned the damaged systems. The pulse. It triggered a cascade failure. It's destabilizing the core. The ground shook once more, harder this time, and an eerie whine filled the air, an unnatural sound, as if the very planet itself were protesting. The Gaia pulse, as powerful as it was, had also been an unstable creation. The sheer amount of energy it generated had been enough to send shock waves through the planet's magnetic field, triggering a feedback loop in the energy reactors that powered the pulse itself. Now, Earth was facing an even greater danger than the Zenith Dominion. "We have to shut it down!" Voss shouted, scrambling to override the system before the cascading failure reached its peak. But the damage had already been done. The energy buildup was spiraling out of control, and even the most advanced fail-safes humanity had built into the system couldn't prevent what was coming next. Andrade could see the writing on the wall. If the pulse continued to build, it would not only devastate Earth's surface, it would tear apart the planet's very core. The energy would destabilize the planet's tectonic plates, triggering massive earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and tsunamis that would ravage the entire globe. The Zenith Dominion had nothing on Earth's potential to destroy itself with its own creation. "We can't stop it," Voss said, his voice hollow. "It's already too far gone." Andrade's mind raced. She thought of her people, of the children playing in the streets, of the families who had hoped for a future beyond the devastation. She thought of everything they had fought for, everything they had sacrificed, and for the first time in her life, she was forced to accept a grim truth. It wasn't just the Zenith Dominion they were fighting, it was the clock running down on humanity itself. "Evacuate," she whispered. "Evacuate the surface, get everyone underground, we have minutes, no more." The command was given, and in the final moments the chaos that followed was unlike anything anyone had ever witnessed. Earth was not going to die quietly. It was going to burn.